Under a sun that could melt iron, a cowboy named Caleb Stone came to Marlow's crossing for a horse. But what he found was a girl, bound and silent, eyes fierce as wildfire, heart wild as the plains. They said she was deaf, useless, cursed. But when he cut her free, the wind itself seemed to bow. He thought he was saving her, but she was the one about to save him. "It hurts, but I want more," the cowboy whispered. "Sweetheart, you're stronger than a Mustang. Stay, hear the story that tamed the wild and healed the broken."
Before we dive in, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We've got more powerful stories coming every single day, and you don't want to miss them. Now, let's begin.
The noon sun hammered the dust-packed streets of Marlow's crossing, turning the cattle market into a blur of heat and motion. Cowboys hollered, coins clinked, and the smell of sweat and leather clung to the air like sin. Caleb Stone stood at the edge of the chaos, hat pulled low, boots crusted with trail dust. He'd come for a mare, nothing more. He wasn't a man given to wandering eyes or wasted words. Then he saw her. At the far end of the pens, a young woman stood tied beside a restless stallion, wrists raw against the rope. Her dress was torn, her cheeks streaked with grime. But her eyes, those eyes were fierce as the western sky before a storm. The trader beside her, Silas Grady, barked to the crowd, "Deaf, dumb, and near worthless, but she'll work for her keep." Laughter rippled through the onlookers. Caleb felt something twist inside him. Grady yanked the girl forward like she was a mule for sale. She stumbled but didn't fall, didn't cry, just looked straight ahead, jaw tight, proud, even in the dust. Caleb couldn't tear his gaze away. He told himself to walk off, to mind his business, but when her eyes lifted and met his, steady, defiant, alive, something in him broke clean open. He didn't know her story, he didn't need to, because in a world that bought and sold everything, he'd just seen something money couldn't own. What would you do if one look made you forget every rule you ever lived by? The crowd pressed closer as Silas Grady kept shouting, his voice slick with cruelty. $50. She's strong, works hard, and don't talk back. Perfect bargain for any man who don't need conversation. His words scraped the air like a rusted blade. Men laughed, boots scuffing in the dirt. Caleb Stone didn't laugh. He stood dead still, thumb hooked on his belt, fighting the urge crawling through his chest. The girl, Evelyn, he caught the name in Grady's spit, stood tall, dust swirling around her bare feet. Not begging, not breaking, just waiting. Like she'd already learned what people could do, and refused to give them the pleasure of fear. A rancher near Caleb snorted. "I'll give 40. She ain't worth more." Grady's eyes gleamed. 50, or I'll keep her myself. Maybe she'll fetch more after a week of obedience lessons." The laughter cut through Caleb like gunfire. Before he knew it, his hand went to his vest. He pulled out a roll of bills, voice calm but low. 50. Silence fell. Dust drifted between them. Grady blinked, surprised, then grinned that snake grin. Well, well, didn't figure a man like Caleb Stone needed company. Cash up front. Caleb stepped forward, counted every dollar, and tossed the bundle. Grady caught it mid-air and shoved Evelyn toward him. She stumbled into Caleb's chest, trembling but unflinching. He drew his knife, not for her, but to slice the rope binding her wrists. The frayed fibers fell away, leaving red rings in her skin. Caleb looked into her eyes. "You're free now," he said softly. "Can you walk?" She nodded once. He turned toward the open road without another word, but something in his gut told him he hadn't bought a servant. He'd just invited fate to ride beside him. He came to buy a horse, so why does it feel like he'd just bought his destiny? The wagon wheels groaned against the dry earth as Caleb Stone steered away from Marlow's crossing, the town shrinking behind a veil of red dust. The girl sat in the back, silent, knees drawn to her chest. Caleb hadn't said a word since cutting her free, and the air between them felt as heavy as the sky before rain. He told himself he didn't owe her comfort. He'd done his part, paid the money, stopped the cruelty. That should have been the end of it. But every few miles, he found himself glancing back. Her dark hair whipped in the wind, face pale against the settling sun. She looked small back there, but not weak, just waiting. "Water's in the canteen," he said finally, keeping his eyes on the horizon. She looked up, then nodded, slow and careful, understanding enough from the motion of his lips. She took a sip, hands trembling, and set it back gently, as if afraid to take too much. Caleb tightened his grip on the reins. The horses snorted. The scent of storm filled the air. He wasn't sure what bothered him more, the silence or the strange sense that she belonged beside him, though he didn't even know her voice. The land stretched endless around them, mesquite shadows crawling across gold grass, sky bruised purple. A hawk circled high above, free in a way neither of them were. He caught her watching him once, eyes sharp, studying his every move. When he met her gaze, she didn't look away. It was the same look from the market, steady, wild, and hauntingly alive. Caleb looked forward again, jaw tight. He'd thought he'd left trouble behind in town, but the further they rode, the clearer it became. Trouble was sitting right behind him. By late afternoon, the sky turned the color of tarnished brass. A dry wind rose from the south, tugging at Caleb's hat and the horses' manes. He knew that smell. Dust and danger. A storm was coming. The air thickened fast. The sun vanished behind a rolling wall of grit. Caleb whipped the reins, voice sharp. "We need cover!" The wind swallowed his words. Sand cut at his skin like glass. He could barely see the road, only the faint outline of the wagon ahead. Then a small hand tugged his sleeve. Evelyn, crouched beside him, pointed toward the southwest. Empty land, no visible shelter. Caleb shook his head. "That's suicide." She gripped his arm harder, eyes fierce, motioning again. "Trust me," they seemed to say. Lightning split the sky. Against instinct, Caleb turned the wagon where she pointed. Minutes later, the ground broke open into a narrow canyon, hidden from sight, deep enough to swallow them whole. He drove the horses down the rocky slope, Hart hammering. They barely made it before the storm hit full force. Sand raged above them, wind screaming like lost souls. Evelyn pressed close as he threw a tarp over them both. He could feel her shaking, but not from fear. From strength wound tight as wire. He looked down at her, dust streaking her face, and realized she hadn't just saved him, she'd guided him. Would you trust a stranger's silent instinct, even if it meant your life? Let us know in the comment. The storm eased by nightfall, leaving only a low moan in the canyon's throat. Caleb coaxed a small flame from damp matches, the fire flickering against red rock walls. The horses huddled near the wagon, exhausted but alive. Across the glow, Evelyn sat wrapped in his coat, hair tangled, eyes half hidden in shadow. Her silence wasn't empty. It was deliberate, calm. Caleb found himself watching her more than the fire, wondering how someone could look so fragile and yet so steady in the same breath. He cleared his throat, voice rough from dust. "You all right?" She looked up, understanding the question from his tone. She nodded once, then pointed to him, brows lifting slightly, as if asking your name. Caleb smiled faintly. He pointed at himself. "Caleb." Then he touched his chest again and mouthed it slower, letting her read his lips. K-Leb. Her lips parted. She hesitated, then touched her chest gently. Evelyn. The name formed soundlessly, but he caught it all the same. Caleb repeated it quietly, tasting it like a promise. Evelyn. A faint smile curved her mouth, gone as quickly as it came. She reached down, pressed her palm flat to the ground. The horses stirred softly as if answering her. Caleb stared, half in awe. She wasn't hearing the world. She was feeling it. Evelyn lifted her gaze to him again. The firelight danced between them, painting her face gold and red. Caleb leaned back, heart thrumming. He'd met 100 women in his life, but never one who could speak without a single word. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't hurt. It healed. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving the land scrubbed raw and shining. Caleb guided the wagon through the valley until the low roofs of the Broken S Ranch appeared, his world of dust, fences, and silence. He hadn't meant to bring anyone here, least of all a stranger, but there she was beside him, eyes roaming the horizon as if memorizing every blade of grass. When they stopped, the horses snorted, restless. His mare, Faith, limped forward, favoring one leg. Caleb cursed softly, jumping down to check the injury. Before he could reach for the bridle, Evelyn moved past him, kneeling beside the horse with gentle, practiced hands. She ran her fingers along the swollen joint, feeling, listening through her palms. Faith snorted once, then stood still, calm as twilight. Caleb stared. "You've done this before," he murmured. She looked up, met his eyes, and gave the smallest nod. In that moment the wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of rain and something unspoken between them. He wasn't sure if it was luck, instinct, or something deeper, but whatever lived inside her had steadied not just his horse, but something wild in him, too. Is she gifted, or touched by something the West still fears to name? For a few quiet weeks, the Broken S Ranch breathed easier. Evelyn worked like she'd been born to the land, feeding the hens at sunrise, calming spooked cattle at dusk, mending fences with sure, quiet hands. She never asked, never complained, never wandered far. Yet somehow, the place felt fuller since she'd arrived. But news travels faster than good fortune in a small town. When Caleb rode into Marlow's crossing for supplies, he felt the stares before the first word was spoken. The blacksmith paused mid-swing, and the general store clerk hesitated before filling his order. Then came the whispers, low, sharp, poisonous. "They say the girl don't talk 'cause she don't need to. Calls the animals with her mind. Heard she healed a horse with a single touch. Witchcraft, that's what it is." Caleb said nothing, jaw tight beneath his hat brim. He'd seen fear dressed as faith before, back when soldiers called mercy a weakness. Now, the same kind of blindness filled the townsfolk's eyes. By the time he rode home, the words followed him like flies around a carcass. Evelyn met him at the gate, a question in her eyes. He forced a smile, but his stomach burned. She didn't need to hear the gossip to feel it. The horses had been restless all day. Even the wind carried tension. That night, as stars spilled cold light over the prairie, Caleb watched her from the porch. Evelyn stood by the corral, hand pressed to the earth, whispering to something unseen. And he realized she wasn't the danger here. It was the world that couldn't stand what it didn't understand. The wind had gone still that night, too still. Even the crickets held their breath. Caleb had just banked the fire when he heard it, a low hum drifting through the dark, soft as prayer, strange as thunder without rain. It came from the barn. He grabbed his lantern, boots crunching gravel, and eased the door open. Inside, the horses stood utterly calm. Evelyn was there, her back to him, brushing Faith's mane. Her lips moved, shaping a sound that trembled through the air, a melody without words. It was raw and aching, full of something older than language itself. Caleb froze. He'd been told she couldn't speak, but this wasn't speech. It was feeling made sound. The tune wrapped around him, tender and haunting. Faith lowered her head, eyes half closed. Even the wind outside seemed to listen. When Evelyn turned and saw him, the song broke. She stepped back, startled, hands trembling. He raised a hand slowly. "Don't stop," he said, voice barely a whisper. "It's beautiful." She shook her head, fear clouding her eyes. He took a step closer, close enough for the lantern glow to catch the faint scars at her throat. He understood then. Someone had taken her voice. Gently he reached for her hand, the air thick with dust and emotion. "You're stronger than a Mustang, Evelyn," he murmured. "Don't ever forget that." Her breath hitched, tears welled, and for the first time since he'd met her, she didn't look afraid, just free. When fear meets tenderness, which one survives? By sunrise, the whispers had turned to shouts. Dust rose behind a dozen riders as Marlow's crossing came for the so-called witch. They carried torches, ropes, the smell of fear disguised as righteousness. Caleb saw them crest the ridge and felt the air tighten, heavy as gunmetal. Evelyn was in the corral, hands steady on a trembling colt. She turned as the mob thundered closer, eyes wide, not with panic, but weary understanding. She had seen this before. Caleb stepped in front of her, rifle in hand. "You'll do your preaching from the road," he barked. The preacher's voice rang out. "You sheltered darkness, Stone! That girl's cursed! She commands beasts and blinds good men with her spells." Caleb's jaw clenched. "She's no witch. She's a healer. The only darkness here is in your hearts." The mob surged, anger feeding on its own echo. Then Evelyn moved, calm, deliberate. She stepped past Caleb and lifted her hands, one pressed to her chest, the other to the sky. Her lips didn't form words, but her intent was clear. Peace. The ground seemed to hum. The horses in the corral raised their heads and neighed in unison, a sound that rolled like thunder across the plain. Torches flickered. The mob faltered. Caleb watched as the animals stilled, their eyes bright but calm. Evelyn turned, wind in her hair, and the crowd's fury crumbled into awe. No one spoke, No one moved, and for the first time fear itself bowed its head. The night after the standoff smelled of rain and smoke, only this time the smoke came from the Broken S Ranch. Caleb woke to the glow outside his window, heart hammering. The barn was burning. Flames clawed at the sky, devouring the rafters that had once sheltered them. He ran barefoot into the yard, shouting her name. Evelyn was already there, framed in the firelight, her face streaked with soot but unbroken. Sparks flew around her like angry stars as she tried to free the horses. Caleb grabbed a bucket, but the blaze was too fierce, the wind too strong. When it was over, the barn stood in black ruins. The smell of char and sorrow hung thick. Someone had written a message in ash on the fence. "Send the witch away." Caleb's hands shook with fury. "They did this," he said, voice low. "Cowards." Evelyn touched his arm, stopping him. Her eyes glistened, not with fear, but with defiance. She signed one word he understood without needing to know her language. "Stay." He dropped the bucket, chest heaving. The fire crackled behind them, the light painting her like a spirit made of flame and will. Caleb reached for her hand, rough fingers closing around hers. "No one burns what I love," he swore. "Not while I'm breathing." Evelyn's eyes softened. The wind carried a single ember between them, glowing, dying, and rising again. "When the world turns against you, will love be enough to fight back?" Share your thoughts in the comments. Weeks passed, and the town grew quiet, but silence never meant peace. Caleb rebuilt what he could, one board at a time, while Evelyn tended to the wounded animals that had survived the fire. She never complained, never cried. Yet sometimes, when dusk settled and the land turned gold, he'd catch her staring toward the horizon as if waiting for a ghost. That ghost arrived one evening. A rider approached from the west, slumped, ragged, more shadow than man. Caleb reached for his rifle, but Evelyn froze. She knew that gait, that worn hat, that broken shape in the saddle. Her father. He dismounted with trembling hands, eyes hollowed by guilt. "Evelyn," he rasped, voice barely human. "I thought I was saving myself. I only damned you." His knees buckled in the dirt. "I sold my soul the day I sold my daughter." Evelyn stood still for a long time. Caleb waited for anger, for the storm he knew lived inside her. Instead, she knelt. Her palm touched her father's weathered cheek, her eyes filling but unflinching. Then she pressed her hand to her own heart and back to his, slow, steady. Forgiveness. The old man wept into her hands, and for the first time the wind around the ranch felt gentle. Caleb watched from the porch, throat tight. He had seen battles won with bullets and rage, but this quiet mercy, was a strength he would never fully understand. Spring returned to the valley, with shy sunlight and the slow hum of renewal. Green crept back into the land where fire had once fed, and the Broken S Ranch breathed again. Caleb leaned on the corral rail, watching Evelyn move among the horses. She carried a quiet grace now, stronger, steadier, her laughter silent, but seen in every line of her face. The townsfolk came and went without fear these days. They brought grain, tools, thanks, whispered under their breath. The same people who'd once raised torches now tipped their hats to her, calling her healer, not witch. That evening, as the sun slipped behind the mesquite ridge, Caleb walked to the tree where they'd taken shelter during the storm so long ago. Evelyn followed, her hands tracing the bark as though it remembered. He turned to her, heart heavy with gratitude that words could never carry. "You changed this land," he said softly. "Changed me too." She smiled, touching her fingers to his chest. "You," her gesture said. He shook his head, stepped closer, and whispered the words that had lived between them since the night of the song. "Sweetheart, you're stronger than a Mustang." Her eyes shimmered with quiet joy. She reached up, brushed his cheek, and rested her forehead against his. Around them, the horses stirred but did not run. The air itself felt tamed. Caleb closed his eyes, breathing her in, the scent of earth and rain and redemption. In a world that broke wild things, they had found a way to stay whole. Some scars don't fade under a Texas sun, but sometimes love makes 'em worth wearing. He came to buy a horse and found a heart stronger than any Mustang. If that story stirred something in you, partner, hit that like button, saddle up in the comments, and ride with us for the next tale of the Wild West. Because out here, every heart's got a little dust and a little fire left in it.